This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Should Catholics get prenups, or is this really a bad thing? Well, I came across this little debate on Twitter, and it was between Jeremy Boring, who's the head of the Daily Wire. Of course, you all know the Daily Wire, Michael Knowles, Ben Shapiro, all those guys. Jeremy Boring, and he was kind of commenting on a statement that was made by Lila Rose. Now, of course, Lila Rose, you know, as a big-time pro-life advocate. She's the founder of Live Action. She's done so much for the pro-life movement. She was responding to a tweet by this guy named Zuby. Now, Zuby has over 1 million followers on Twitter. He's a rapper. He's kind of a mogul. And he said this. He said, "I am a millionaire. If you think I am getting married without a prenup, then you are insane or naive. I trust God. I will trust my wife. My wife will trust me. Neither of us will trust the government." Okay, so that's what Zuby said. And then Lila Rose said this in response to Zuby. I think they know each other too. But anyways, she said, "If you truly trust your wife, Zuby, you don't need a prenup. And if you don't fully trust your would-be wife, marrying them is a bad idea. The nature of marriage is, until death do us part. A prenup says otherwise." Okay, so that was Lila Rose's take on this. And then Jeremy Boring from the Daily Wire, here's what he said in response to Lila Rose. I mean, this is, and at first I have to say he disagreed with her a little bit. And at first when I read his take, I was like, I don't know about this. But the more I thought about it, it's just intriguing. Let me read this to you. Here's what Jeremy Boring said in response to Lila Rose saying you should definitely not have a prenup. He said, and I quote, "I deeply disagree with this take from my friend, Lila Rose. It's common among Christians, this idea of not having a prenup, but it's misguided." By the way, just to let you know, so Lila Rose is a Catholic. Okay, so she'd be looking at things from a Catholic perspective. Jeremy Boring, though, he is an evangelical. He's an evangelical. And here's his take on this. He says, "It's common among Christians to not have a prenup, but it's misguided." He says, "A prenup does not create a way out of your marriage, as Christians often suggest. Divorce creates a way out of your marriage. And divorce exists whether we would like it to or not. With or without a prenup, people in their millions elect for divorce, and they have for as long as marriage has existed. This is because no human can be fully trusted. Not your spouse, not even yourself. God alone can be fully trusted. All a prenup does is allow the couple themselves, before they ever get married, to contemplate the consequences of divorce. This is in every way superior to walking into marriage with idealistic blinders on, only to allow the courts long afterwards to arbitrarily determine those consequences if someone chooses the way out called divorce. As is often the case, our forebears had great wisdom in this regard. Christian marriage began as Jewish marriage, and Jewish marriage has always involved a prenup, going back to at least a century before Christ. Now, this is just to interject here. This is where it kind of really got intriguing for me. So Jeremy Boring then goes on to talk about Jewish marriages and something that is in existence now and has been for centuries. He says, quote, "It's called a ketubah, a marriage contract. It is the backbone of the marriage, the actual thing being vowed, and it includes the negotiated consequences for violating that vow. In addition to being far better than letting a judge arbitrarily determine what it is that you agreed to after the fact, the ketubah also gives the young couple, and historically their family as well, the opportunity to work through important practical questions about what marriage is. This process increases the likelihood of a marriage succeeding. It does not decrease it. Sound premarital counseling to work through the emotional and spiritual aspects of marriage increases the likelihood of success as well. Shared religious belief and being immersed in a community that also shares that belief and looks down on divorce helps as well. But idealism and pretending that divorce is not an available legal option is not a recipe for success. Marriage requires your eyes be open and your shoulder be down. End of quote. Okay, so that's Jeremy Boring kind of responding to Lila Rose. And he's saying, you know what, there actually is maybe there's a place for a prenup even in Christian marriages. So I'm wondering what you guys think about this. Do you take the side of Lila Rose saying, hey, if you have a prenup, you've been hopelessly defeated already. This is ridiculous. You should maybe, if you're thinking about a prenup, you shouldn't even be marrying this person. Or do you kind of take the side of Jeremy Boring here, who says, you know what, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and actually it could even help the marriage. And you heard the other things that he said too. So I'm really curious to see what your take is on this. This is interesting. I read a piece from the Arlington Catholic Herald, an article that was dealing with this whole question about whether or not having a prenuptial agreement is an impediment to a Catholic marriage, because some people think that it calls into question, just as Lila Rose kind of put it, the total commitment required for a marriage. Because are you saying, if you have a prenuptial agreement, are you saying that in the back of your mind, you're kind of thinking this might not work out? You're not in 100%. Even such an agreement, the very fact that it exists is that sort of setting up for the dissolution of the marriage. But in actuality, the Church, the Catholic Church, does not have a prohibition against prenuptial agreements. All things being equal, they are not an impediment to a Catholic marriage. And there may even be circumstances in which it actually might be a good idea. When it comes to the church and marriage, it's all about the beginning of the marriage. It's all about the source. You have to go back to the source. That's why there's in annulment cases that people are interviewed who are there, who are part of the deal. Maybe the maid of honor, what was she really thinking? That whole thing, because it's all about, did you know what you were getting into, and did you freely agree to this with full knowledge? Okay, so this is why they ask you the 4 questions at every Catholic wedding mass. Have you come here freely in order to give yourselves without reserve to one another? It can't be because your mother-in-law is making you do this. Somebody's got a gun to your head. It has to be undertaken freely. Love is a free gift. Have you come here freely to give yourselves without reserve to one another? Do you promise to be faithful? And do you accept children as a gift from God? And will you raise them according to the laws of Christ and his church? So if your answer is no to any one of those questions, then it's not a valid marriage. So you have to say yes, and it has to be legit. And so what the annulment case tries to do is the marriage tribunals will go back and try to see what was the intent here. Was there an understanding here? Did the people know what they were getting into? So stuff that happens down the road doesn't really play into it. So in a sense, you could say there's no such thing as a Catholic divorce, but sometimes couples do have to split up. They're still validly married. A valid marriage is valid for life until one of the spouses dies. There may be legitimate reasons for a couple to separate. For example, if there is abuse in the relationship or something like that. And when you get married too, from the church's perspective, they're only concerned about the sacramental side of things. But there is, of course, a legal perspective to marriage from the state. Whether it's the state of Texas or whatever state you find yourself in, whatever country you find yourself in, there's usually a legal document that you have to sign as well. So a couple could be considered validly married still in the Catholic Church, but according to the state, they're divorced because they've separated and there had to be a legal court case to determine who gets what. In a sense, that could be what a prenup can help to kind of figure out. And I'm not saying do it or don't do it, but one situation that can come up is perhaps when a widow marries a widower, they both have children from previous marriages, their spouses have died, and they need to clarify what's the common property, what belongs to who. If one of us dies in this new marriage, who gets what in terms of the children or my spouse's children that from the previous marriage, their spouses died. These could be kind of thorny questions, but the truth of the matter is simply this. The Catholic Church does not consider a prenuptial agreement an impediment to a valid marriage. In other words, you can have a prenuptial agreement. I'm not saying you should have one. That's a personal choice. But if you did have one, that has nothing to do with the validity of the marriage. Now, having said that, if there is a priest or somebody else, but in all likelihood, a priest interviews the couple as part of the pre-Cana program, if you will. If a priest hears that come up, oh, by the way, we have a prenup. We're engaged to be married. We've just signed our prenup. Just thought we'd let you know. The priest probably should raise an eyebrow, at least one eyebrow, maybe two. Just say, oh, really? That should pique his attention. That should pique his attention. And he needs to really investigate, okay, why do you have one? So as long as the prenup doesn't contradict any of the basic Catholic teaching on marriage, it's permitted. It is permitted. So from a technical point of view, just wanted to let you know that is the case. Now, people, like I said, they'll disagree on whether or not you should have one, but you could have one. This entire episode of The Cale Clarke Show is available on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. Don't delay. Download the app today, and thanks for listening.